Hello and welcome to another Flesh and Blood video here in the trash. Today I'm going to be giving you guys a quick start guide on how to pick up Flesh and Blood cards and play them out of the box. I'm going to be going over simple mechanics, card structures, the general idea of the gameplay, and giving you guys what you need to just pick up some Blitz decks and start playing the game. I'm going to be doing a bunch more Flesh and Blood content here. I'm really inspired to talk about this game and to hopefully get more people into it. So thank you. I appreciate you being here, and let's get into it. So the first thing you need to know when getting into Flesh and Blood is that this is a game based around specific heroes. Now, there are a bunch of different types of heroes, and the types of heroes that you play dictate the types of cards that you can have in your deck. For instance, warrior actions can only be in warrior decks. The same goes for brutes or guardians or ninjas or any combination of those things. As you can see, heroes have an ability on their card that kind of outlines what the deck will want to do. So whenever you choose your hero, you'll build around that sort of mechanic or way to win usually. So the number on the bottom left of your card is the hero's intellect. Your hero's intellect represents the amount of cards you draw up to at the end of your turn. An important note about intellect is that it doesn't represent a hand size. It actually is just the maximum amount of cards that you draw up to at the end of your turn. Certain cards will have you drawing more cards in a game of Flesh and Blood, but at the end of your turn, you will always draw up to that intellect number if you have below that number. Blitz and Standard are the two main constructed formats in Flesh and Blood. Blitz decks use the young version of your heroes with a lesser health total, while Standard decks use the older versions with more health. Just like games like Magic the Gathering, the objective of Flesh and Blood is to reduce your opponent's life total to 0. Now, the next thing to know when getting into Flesh and Blood is that there is equipment that you'll want to be putting on your heroes at the start of the game. You may have heard it described as a degenerative game before, where you are losing resources and kind of wearing down as you go, as opposed to building up a board state in games like Magic the Gathering. So you'll start with equipment out on the board. There is a headpiece, a chest piece, an arms, and a legs piece that you can attach to any one of your heroes at the start of the game. And these different pieces of equipment can either synergize rather heavily with your hero if it's a specific legendary equipment for them, but there's also generic equipment that you can attach to your hero, and that's a good way to start. There's a lot of generic equipment that you can get for cheap and put on your hero. So every hero can have a head, chest, arms, and legs piece, and like I said, each of these things do different things during the game to protect or enhance your hero. And finally, weapons. Every class has access to different weapons that further enhance the gameplay for their character. Some can attack, others just enhance your turn or provide different abilities during the game. So now that you understand heroes and the equipment that they can use during the game, let's briefly go over the layout of your board during a game of Flesh and Blood. In the center of your playmat, you'll put your hero with their weapon on either their right or left hand. If it's a two-handed weapon, they can only have one weapon. If it's one-handed weapons, they can use two. On the left side of the board, we have your equipment. On the top, you have a helmet. Below that is your chest piece. To the right of your chest piece are your arms, and below your chest piece are your legs. On the right side of the board, you have your deck. Above that is your graveyard. To the left is your pitch zone, which we'll get to that in a little bit. Below that is your banish zone, which is essentially like exile in Magic the Gathering. And then below your hero is your arsenal, another place that I'll mention later. Now, there are a bunch of different cards that you can have in your decks in Flesh and Blood, but I'm going to go over one right now just so we can understand how to play them on your turn. So this is a generic action from Welcome to Rathe called Snatch. We're looking at red Snatch, but there's also yellow Snatch and blue Snatch. On the bottom left, you can see the attack power for each version of the card. The top left is the pitch value of the card. The red Snatch pitches for 1 pitch point, the yellow Snatch pitches for 2 pitch points, and the blue Snatch pitches for 3 pitch points. These pitch points are used to play cards from your hand. To identify how much your card costs to play, you can look at the top right of your card. Snatch obviously costs 0 to play, but there are other cards like this red Drone of Brutality that costs 2 to play. So in order to play Drone of Brutality from your hand, you would need to pitch cards from your hand to fulfill that cost. So say in your hand, you only have 2 red Snatches. In order to pay for the Drone of Brutality, you would need to pitch both of your red snatches to fulfill that cost. If you had a yellow snatch that pitches for 2 pitch points, you could just use that card to pay for the Drone of Brutality. You can also use a blue snatch to pay for Drone of Brutality, which would leave you with 1 extra pitch point that you can use later on your turn, or it would vanish at the end of your turn. It's important to understand that you can't just pitch cards for no reason. You can only pitch cards to pay for a cost. Once you're done pitching a card to pay for a cost, it goes to the left of your library, and at the end of your turn, you get to put it on the bottom of your library in an order that you choose. One final note about playing cards is that they can be used on either turn. The beauty of Flesh and Blood is that you rarely have a dead card in your hand. If you look at the bottom right of this Throne of Brutality, you can see that there's 2 defense points. That means that this card can not only be used to pitch or attack on your turn, but it can be used to defend from an attack on your opponent's turn. Okay, so now that we understand how to pay for cards and play them, let's go over a practice turn of Flesh and Blood. Players are given 1 action point on their turn. That means that they can only do one thing unless a card specifically specifies that they gain Go Again. Go Again is the key phrase used in Flesh and Blood to let players know that they've gained another action point and can do something else on their turn. For this example, I won't be playing a card with Go Again just to keep things simple and to understand what a very basic turn will look like. So say we'd like to attack with Drone of Brutality as our action for the turn. We would pay the cost of 2 pitch points, and then this card would enter the combat chain. The combat chain is where all of the interaction between players and their actions occurs. If a player has Go Again, that creates a new link in the combat chain. But like I said, for this example, we'll just be doing 1 link in a very basic chain. The Drone of Brutality would be placed on the combat chain. Our opponent will then block for 3 defense points using a Warrior's Valor. Defending players can block with as many cards as they want to prevent as much damage as they want, but for this example, I'm just going to have them defend with 1 card for 3 defense. Now, it's important to understand also during combat on the defending player's turn, it actually doesn't cost pitch points to defend with cards. You get to just defend for free. After blocks have been declared, then we have what's called the attack reaction phase. The reaction phases are pretty similar to Priority and Magic. So after you've declared attacks, the defending player gets to defend, then you get an attack reaction, and then after that, they get an opportunity to have a defense reaction, and that goes back and forth until there are no more reactions on either side. So since our opponent is only blocking for 3 defense and there have been no attack or defense reactions, they'll take damage equal to the difference of the attack and their defense. So they're taking 3 damage here. Once there are no more actions to take and the combat chain is complete, all of the cards in the chain, including your opponent's cards that are used to defend, will go into each player's graveyard, and everything that we use to pitch will go into the bottom of our library in an order that we choose. Some cards like this Drone of Brutality actually go back into your library after use instead of the graveyard, but generally most cards go to the graveyard after use. At the end of your turn, before you draw cards, you can put a card in your arsenal. Now this is the zone I mentioned earlier, and it's important because it's basically a holding area for a card you'd like to play later. Before you draw up your hand size, if you have any cards remaining in your hand, you can choose to put a card face down in your arsenal and save it for a later turn. It's important to understand though that you can't use cards in your arsenal to block or to pitch to pay for other costs. You can only play them out of your arsenal at a later turn. Once you've decided to put something in your arsenal or not, you'll redraw cards up to your hero's intellect. At the end of the first turn of the game, and only the first turn of the game, both players redraw to their hand size. After that, only the player whose turn it is will draw up to their hand size at the end of their turn. So if you're defending, sometimes it's a good idea to not play out your whole hand, because then you'll have nothing to do on your next turn. Sometimes you want to let some damage through so that you can keep cards in your hand to play on your turn and then redraw at the end of your turn. And that's it. That's a general turn of Flesh and Blood. Once you understand those key mechanics, how to play cards and what the cards can do, then you can start branching out and getting more complicated with the game. You can start learning all the combos for certain heroes, or, building decks that have specific gameplay and strategies that you enjoy. I hope that this quick start guide is helpful in understanding how to play the game and is a good jumping in point for people that are just wanting to learn the basic mechanics. You can definitely go further than this. and I'll likely be making more complicated videos to teach you more of the complex mechanics, doing deck techs and things like that. Again, if you're into this sort of video and you want to get into Flesh and Blood, I'm going to be making a ton more content for this game. I'm in love with it right now, and I want to keep pumping out content. So let me know, comment, like, subscribe, do all the things, smash the buttons, you know, whatever cringe things kids are saying these days. Thanks again for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.